month by having two services, the one last Sunday and the one today, in which we explore topics through a poetic form of creativity. And today we also, of course, celebrate Earth Day. And according to their website, the Earth Day Network states, on the 22nd of April, 1970, millions of people took to the streets to protest the negative impacts of 150 years of industrial development. And in July of the same year, Congress and the Nixon administration created the Environmental Protection Agency and robust environmental laws, such as the Clean Water Act and the Endangered Species Act. In case you didn't already know it, the New York Times Magazine's lead article on climate change this weekend tells us that, quote, national climate policy is backsliding. The Trump administration has reversed various Obama-era regulations meant to combat or adapt to climate change, including the Clean Power Plan, which required power plants to reduce their carbon emissions, and a rule instructing the federal government to consider sea level rise and other effects of a changing climate when building new roads, bridges, and other infrastructure. It tells us that, quote, the absence of federal leadership on climate as emissions continue to rise globally has the effect of shrinking the time available to forestall worst-case scenarios. So the poetry today of Wendell Berry is appropriate in light of the dire situation this planet faces. Wendell Erdman Berry was born on August the 5th, 1934, and quoting his biography on Wikipedia, he is an American novelist, poet, environmental activist, cultural critic, and farmer. Lane's Landing is in north central Kentucky on the western bank of the Kentucky River, not far from where it flows into the Ohio River. Berry writes that it is a place I don't remember not knowing, where he has farmed, lived, and written since 1965. He's written at least 25 books of poems, 16 volumes of essays, and 11 novels and short story collections, and his writing is grounded in the notion that one's work ought to be rooted in and responsive to one's place. Famously, in the 1970s, some of you may remember, Berry engaged in debates with Earl Butz, the Secretary of Agriculture under Presidents Nixon and Ford, and he spoke passionately against the corporate takeover of farming and for the traditional farmer who, quote, first fed himself off his farm and then fed other people, who farmed with his family and passed the land on to people who knew it and had the best reason to take care of it. That farmer stood at the convergence of traditional values, our values, values that declined as that farmer is replaced by technologies whose only standard is profit. So Berry the poet goes beyond the oft-imagined assumption that poets sit disengaged from the real world while they play with words and rhyme. In fact, in 2009, due to the University of Kentucky's close association with coal interests in the state, Berry removed his papers from the university. He explained to the Lexington Herald leader, I don't think the University of Kentucky can be so ostentatiously friendly to the coal industry and still be a friend to me and the interests for which I have stood for the last 45 years. If they love the coal industry that much, I have to cancel my friendship. Instead, the papers were donated to the Kentucky Historical Society. In 2017, a documentary, Look and See, was made about Berry by Laura Dunn. You can find it on Netflix. That experience was a challenge for Dunn because, in her words, Berry is anti-screen. No computers, TV, or movies. He thinks it contributes to the decline of literacy and the deterioration of imagination. This morning, we will hear Barry's poetry read by 4 members of the congregation who are also members of the Sierra Club local chapter. And all the poems come from This Day, a collection of Sabbath poems that span the years 1979 to 2013. The Sabbath poems are motivated by Barry's longtime habit of walking out onto the land on Sunday mornings. And as he puts it, quote, I go free from the tasks and intentions of my work days, and so my mind becomes hospitable to unintended thoughts, to what I am very willing to call inspiration. The Sabbath poems have been described by Mark Hudson as written from a particular place and on particular Sabbaths, and so should be read as part of a spiritual practice and as poems in some sense devoted to dwelling, to living thoughtfully in one place. A possible context for Barry's project might be a key observation by Henry David Thoreau in his essay Life Without Principle from the 1800s, that Americans are so engaged in infinite bustle that there is no Sabbath. And he notes that there is nothing, not even crime, more opposed to poetry, to philosophy, aye, to life itself, than this incessant business. If they were that busy in the mid-1800s, imagine what Thoreau would think about now. So these poems this morning do not have titles. They are simply identified by Roman numerals in the year they were written. And so I invite the first reader up to the podium to read Sabbath poem 3 from 1983.
Now, though the season warms, the woods inherits harms of human enterprise. Our making shakes the skies and taints the atmosphere. We have ourselves to fear. We burn the world to live. Our living blights the leaf. A clamor high above entered the shadowed grove, withdrew, was still, and then the water thrush began, the song that is a prayer, a form made in the air that all who live here pray, the Sabbath of our day. May our kind live to breathe, air worthy of the breath of all singers that sing. In joy of their making, light of the risen year, songs worthy of the ear of breathers worth their air, of workers worth their hire.
The line that most struck me in that poem is, "We burn the world to live." Surely a paradox, but a deadly one. What world will be left if we destroy it? I referred earlier to the New York Times Magazine article, "Can Dirt Save the Earth?" ? Written by Moises Velasquez Manoff. And the author reminds us that the single largest source of carbon emissions related to human activity is heat and power generation, which accounts for about 1/4 of the carbon we put into the atmosphere. Often overlooked, though, is how we use land, which contributes almost as much. The erosion and degradation of soil caused by plowing, intense grazing, and clear cutting has played a significant role in the atmospheric accumulation of heat-trapping gases. He goes on to say, since the start of the Industrial Revolution, agricultural practices in animal husbandry have released an estimated 135 billion metric tons of carbon into the atmosphere. Even at current rates, that's more than a decade's worth of carbon dioxide emissions from all human sources. The world is warming not only because fossil fuels are being burned, but also because soils, forests, and wetlands are being ravaged. Our second poem, 12, from 2008, also addresses our need to burn the land.
My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Hosea 4:6. We forget the land we stand on and live from. We set ourselves free in an economy founded on nothing, on greed verified by fantasy, on which we entirely depend. We depend on fire that consumes the world without lighting it. To this dark blaze driving the inert metal of our most high desire, we offer our land as fuel, thus offering ourselves at last to be burned. This is our riddle, to which the answer is a life that none of us has lived.
The arrogance of human knowledge is the focus of the next poem, 5, from 2007.
Those who use the world, assuming their knowledge is sufficient, destroy the world. The forest is mangled for sale of a few sticks, or it is bulldozed into a stream and covered over with the earth it once stood upon. The streams turn foul, killing the creatures that once lived from it. Industrial humanity, an alien species, lives by death. In the clutter of facts, the destroyers leave behind them one big story of the world and the world's end that they don't know. They know names and little stories, but the names of everything are not everything. The story of everything told is only a little story. They don't know the languages of the birds who pass northward, feeding through the treetops early in May, kept alive by knowledge never to be said in words. Hang down your head. This is our hope. Words emerge from silence. The silence remains.
That poem recalls for me the story in the book of Genesis of Adam naming the creatures God has made, and how different that Judeo-Christian understanding of stewardship of the earth, which became synonymous with domination of nature, how different from teachings of indigenous peoples. A reading in our hymnal from Black Elk, The Sacred Hoop, describes how the author stands on the highest mountain of all, surveying the hoop of the world beneath him. And he writes, "And while I stood there, I saw more than I can tell, and I understood more than I saw." Recalling Barry's words that the names of everything are not everything, and that there is knowledge never to be said in words. Our final Sabbath poem, 11, from 2010, is written from Barry's perspective after many years of caring about the future of the earth.
The need comes on me now to speak across the years to those who finally will live here after the present ruin in the absence of most of my kind, who by now are dead, or have given their minds to machines and become strange, overqualified for the hard handwork that must be done to remake, so far as humans can remake, all that humans have unmade. To you, whoever you may be, I say, come, meaning to stay. Come, willing to learn what this place like no other will ask of you and your children if you mean to stay. The land responds to good treatment, I heard my father say time and again in his passion to renew, to make whole what ill use had broken. And so to you, whose lives taken from the life of this place I cannot foretell, I say, come and treat it well.
The land responds to good treatment. Strikes me as a very hopeful reminder on Earth Day. And the Velázquez-Manoff article indeed gives us one possible, if partial, solution to global warming: carbon farming that pulls carbon out of the air and into the soil. And he writes that in recent years, some scientists have begun to ask whether we can put some of that carbon back into the soil and into living ecosystems like grasslands and forests. This notion, known as carbon farming, has gained traction as it becomes clear that simply reducing emissions will not sufficiently limit global warming. An authority on climate change operating under the auspices of the United Nations says that humankind also needs to remove some of the carbon already in the atmosphere to avoid, say, the collapse of polar glaciers and the inundation of coastal cities worldwide. The article goes into great detail about the research and experimentation going on into making a real difference to the climate through this type of farming, which is predicated on the very words of Barry in that poem, that the land responds to good treatment. And I will conclude this morning's Poem Fest with an excerpt from one of Barry's more well-known works, which begins with the things that most Americans are consumed with and ends with ways to confound the prevailing consumerist culture. Indeed, Barry's final two words show us that he takes his radical Christianity and the core meaning of his faith very seriously indeed. And the poem is called Manifesto, the Mad Farmer Liberation Front. Love the quick profit, the annual raise, vacation with pay. Want more of everything ready-made. Be afraid to know your neighbors and to die, and you will have a window in your head. Not even your future will be a mystery anymore. Your mind will be punched in a card and shut away in a little drawer. When they want you to buy something, they will call you. When they want you to die for profit, they will let you know. So friends, every day, do something that won't compute. Love the Lord, love the world, work for nothing, take all that you have and be poor. Love someone who does not deserve it. Denounce the government and embrace the flag. Hope to live in that free republic for which it stands. Give your approval to all you cannot understand. Praise ignorance, for what man has not encountered, he has not destroyed. Ask the questions that have no answers. Invest in the millennium. Plant sequoias. Say that your main crop is the forest that you did not plant, that you will not live to harvest. Say that the leaves are harvested when they have rotted into the mold. Call that profit. Prophesy such returns. Put your faith in the 2 inches of humus that will build under the trees every 1,000 years. Expect the end of the world. Laugh. Laughter is immeasurable. Be joyful, though you have considered all the facts. Go with your love to the fields. Lie down in the shade. Rest your head in her lap. Swear allegiance to what is highest and nighest your thoughts. As soon as the generals and the politicos can predict the motions of your mind, lose it. Leave it as a sign to mark the false trail, the way you didn't go. Be like the fox who makes more tracks than necessary, some in the wrong direction. Practice resurrection. Blessed be. Amen.